Hi guys, welcome back to the Adventures of Cosmic. I'm Cosmic, and we are on book number 3 of Blackmore Sisters, part 2. Okay, if you haven't seen the previous books, if you haven't seen all 3 parts of Dead Wrong and both parts of Dead and Buried, then I suggest you go watch that. And if you haven't seen the first part of Dead Tide, I suggest you go watch that before you watch this. I suggest once you get to chapter 11, you stop because we are going to be re-listening to it. Okay? Before I get started, I'm going to show you the email. So YouTube didn't try to blackmail me. Okay. And here's my notes. Refresh. Sorry, y'all. It gets a little crazy, okay? So far, if you haven't watched the previous part, Reinhardt Skinner is dead, okay? And random guy that was dead last book, Celeste was the key. So she's the main book in book 3, okay? Sorry, 3. This is, I don't know what I just did. 7. Yeah, 7. I don't know why I did 7. No big deal. Anyway. Okay, and now we're gonna get into the book. First, we're gonna... Okay, so where we left off in the last part of this book, Jolene was on a... Why is this... I'm concerned. Okay, I was gonna say, like, why is this part blank? It is not blank. Dungeon, this is the second book. Because, okay, so I write notes for all the books. So, okay, and here's the book we're on. Okay. And I have everything sorted by, so I have it sisters, and then I have the guys. So right now, Morgan's the oldest, Fiona's second oldest, Celeste is the third oldest, Jolene's the youngest, and then I have, by the order that they're put in, it's Jake, I think Cal, and then Luke, and let me check. It's Jake, Luke, then Cal. Okay, so this is Jolene, one of my favorites, and then we got Celeste right here. Okay, so recap for people who've watched the last video. Okay, so basically, so in the previous book, in the epilogue, the cliff that's in their backyard that their mom jumped off of, supposedly, we don't have a clue, because right now, so I don't think you heard, but Celeste's grandma, we know, is for sure dead, because Celeste can see her ghost, and then their Nana or grandma, whichever one they call them. Some of the sisters call her Nana, some of them call her grandma. Anyways, Cliff explodes because Morgan gave the guys that captured her the map that she saw, which triggered a booby trap, which exploded the cliff, and then, so now things are underwater. Now Celeste, after a whole bunch of stuff, Jolene goes to Reinhardt Skinner's house, because, like, drives by it and then notices his garage is open. These guys have his notes, and then they somehow, so Jolene has this like energy that comes out of her hand, and it shot a guy across the wall. I don't know how she did it, but she did it. I guess it's one of her powers. And then for some reason, I don't know, maybe it's like the amount of energy it took to do that. I don't know. She passed out, and then Mateo, because I don't know, just the description of him from earlier, like, oh, this guy's name is Mateo, and he saves her from the guys somehow, drags her out of the house, and for some reason, he touches her butt, okay? It's so weird, okay? Because, okay, so here's the evidence that she found last time about the case she was in. The guy that the wife thought cheating on, the wife's husband was actually cheating on her, because that's what they were hired to find out, if that was the truth. And he was playing grab ass with another woman. I'm sorry, but it's funny when she puts it that way. Ooh, he's playing grab ass with another woman. That, like, how they put it is hilarious. Like, grab ass is like, like, and then like, oh my god. And then, okay, and then Cal is like, Celeste like gets this feeling about Cal, like this really like interesting feeling. Okay, and then if you haven't focused in the other book, Cal has a thing for Celeste. He does, okay? He literally, hold up, I gotta find it. I don't know if it's, let me check. Ah, here it is. It's in this book. He cancels a date for Celeste. Like, in front of Celeste. On the phone. He doesn't, oh, reschedule a rain check, reschedule it. No. 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 He cancels the date. And then, I don't know if this is a sign of, like, how close they are together normally, but he sits close to Celeste on purpose. And this book, it makes Celeste feel uncomfortable. Like, not in a bad way, but like, I really like this guy. Oh my goodness. Like, that feeling, you know? And then Overton tries to get a search warrant on the sisters for some reason. It's weird. Life is crazy. Okay? Okay, so let's get into the book before I say too much shit. Okay, we're on chapter 11.
Chapter 11. Celeste's bare feet scraped against the rough wood of the dock as she contorted her arm behind her shoulder to zip up her wetsuit. The sea air stung her nostrils, and the familiar sound of the ocean rushing over the pebble beach and clutching at the stones to try to drag them back into its depths was like music to her ears. She loved the sea, and scuba diving was one of her favorite pastimes. A small motorboat she borrowed from a friend bobbed in the water at the end of the dock, while Morgan and Buzz, one of Luke's men, loaded diving gear inside. Luke had insisted they take the brick wall of a bodyguard with them, even though Celeste had argued the girls were more than capable of handling themselves. "Ready?" Morgan asked as Celeste climbed into the boat. "Yep." Celeste took the seat in the back, while Morgan moved to the driver's seat. Buzz grunted and sat in the bow, scanning the open ocean with a pair of binoculars. Celeste was learning that he was a man of few words. "So, where do you want to dive?" Morgan steered the boat out of the small cove that housed their dock and into the open ocean, facing the cliff next to their house. From the ocean, the hole from the blast looked raw and jagged. The grass at the top spilling over the edge, the newly exposed rock was lighter in color, a sharp contrast to the rock on either side that had been exposed to the weather for centuries. Celeste squinted at the cliff, which rose almost 100 feet above them. She didn't see any evidence of the caves or passages. Had they all caved in or been sealed off during the blast? I guess we should start right here. She indicated the section halfway between where they'd come from and the point of land that marked the entrance to Perkins Cove. This is the deepest part. I don't know if one could get a ship up near the point. Morgan cut the motor and dropped anchor. Celeste checked the oxygen tanks one more time, then bent to pick one up. Need some help? She looked up, surprised to find Buzz at her side. Sure, she said. He lifted the tank and helped her strap it on, then went back to his watch in the bow. Celeste sat on the edge of the boat to put on her flippers, while mentally preparing herself for the cold water. The Maine Ocean could be shockingly cold, even in summer, but now in fall, it would be frigid. Her wetsuit would help, of course, but it would still be cold. She double-checked her gloves and booties to make sure she had as little skin exposed as possible. Morgan knelt down in front of her and grabbed her wrist. Be careful down there. I have a bad feeling, like you might get lost or something. Celeste made a face. Morgan put her hand up. I know you're a very experienced diver, but my gut feeling says you should be careful. Don't go too deep or anywhere that is too dark. Celeste remembered how Morgan's gut feelings had saved them from being attacked earlier in the summer. They'd been walking down the street when she'd had one of those feelings and pulled Celeste back from an alley opening. If she hadn't, Celeste might have walked right into an ambush. Morgan's gut feeling had helped them escape unharmed. Her grandmother had told her to encourage Morgan to trust her gut feelings more. Clearly, Grandma knew something they didn't. What Morgan had was more than just intuition, and Celeste took her words seriously. I'll be careful. Thanks. She smiled at her sister, then nodded in a signal that she was ready to dive. Stuffing the mouthpiece into her mouth, she tumbled backwards into the cold, silent, underwater world of the Atlantic Ocean. She floated for a few seconds, acclimating her body to the chill and getting her bearings. The open ocean was to her left, the cliff to her right. It was rocky here, and she had to be careful not to let the motion of the waves slam her against the rocks. She dove down deeper, where the movement was calmer. The water was clear. She looked from side to side, not really sure what she was looking for. A sunken ship? A treasure chest? She saw a lobster in a sandy patch on the bottom and wondered briefly if she should snag it for supper, deciding against it when she realized she'd feel bad for days, knowing she'd had the power of life and death over the poor creature and chosen its death. She swam along the edge of the rocks toward the point, hearing only the steady sound of her own breathing as she took the stale oxygen into her lungs. Gliding over an outcropping of rocks, she kept her eye mostly on the bottom, looking for anything that didn't seem natural in the crystal clear water. A sense of calm pushed through her as she swam about 20 feet below the surface. She loved the peaceful feeling of being underwater, the quiet, the graceful movement of the fish, seaweed, and other sea creatures. Something wrapped around her ankle. She jerked her foot away, but whatever it was, held on. Probably a long strip of seaweed, she thought, as she turned to untangle it from her foot. She felt a tug on her heart as she saw a shadowy figure, its arm outstretched toward her ankle. She kicked out with her free foot, pulling the other one back as forcefully as she could, but that only caused the grip seized her chest. Bubbles cascaded out of her mouth as the figure seemed to materialize before her eyes. A bearded man. One of the treasure-hunting pirates? Celeste's mind whirled as she kicked harder, furiously trying to get away. The man was shaking his head, waving his arm. With a jolt, Celeste realized he didn't have any scuba gear on. How could he possibly be underwater without gear? She stopped struggling long enough to notice that he seemed like he was trying to tell her something. She watched as his body shimmered in the water, almost transparent. He seemed to be pointing to the ocean floor below. She looked down, her eye catching the sparkle of something round. The pressure around her ankle eased, and she dived down, reaching out for the gold object. A coin. She turned it over in her hand, recognizing the cross design as being the same as the old Spanish coin
Oh, no,
they
Scudo.
had dug up in their yard earlier in the summer. What had Cal said it was? An escudo or something like that? Very old and very valuable. She put it in her dive pouch. The bearded man swam in front of her, beckoning for her to follow. She was reluctant, but curiosity took over. She swam after him, noting his odd outfit. A white, billowing shirt, tan pants that were torn on the bottoms. The impossibility of him being underwater without a scuba outfit or oxygen
This
tank
is what?
hit her like a face full of ice water. He was a ghost. He didn't seem to be a threat, so she followed. His movements were more like gliding than swimming. He never kicked or moved his arms as he pushed forward, his long hair floating behind him. Celeste felt a seed of doubt in her stomach when she realized he was moving toward the point where the entrance to the cove was. Surely this water was too shallow for a shipwreck. He stopped about 50 feet short of the point, looking back to make sure she was still there. He smiled and then turned west, heading straight into the cliff. Celeste cringed as she imagined him crashing into the jagged rocks at the cliff. Do ghosts feel pain? Maybe he would just pass right through the rock, like those cartoons of Casper the Friendly Ghost she used to watch when she was a kid. But he didn't crash or pass through. He was standing on something, motioning for her to come closer. Her chest tightened when she realized he was standing in the mouth of a big cave. She swam forward just enough to get a good look. She never knew there were caves in the cliffside, and this one was a whopper. She couldn't see very far in, though. It was too dark. The ghost tilted his head toward the back of the cave in a motion that Celeste took to mean he wanted her to follow. She remembered the warning Morgan had given her before the dive, and she floated in place, every muscle telling her to go back to the boat. The ghost glided out to her, reaching out for her wrist, but she pulled away. Her eyes wide inside the mask, shaking her head, no. A look passed over his face. Sadness? He floated back into the cave, and his body disappeared slowly, as if it was evaporating into the water. And Celeste was alone. Her heart kicked when she checked the gauge on her air tanks. She had just enough air to get back to the boat. She turned back in that direction, wondering just what was in the cave, and why the ghost seemed so intent on leading her in there. Chapter 12. How was the scuba dive? Jolene paused with a forkful of carrot cake midway to her mouth as she looked at Morgan and Celeste in the kitchen doorway. Unusual, Morgan said, sliding into the chair next to Jolene at the kitchen island. Jolene's mouth was busy chewing cake, so she simply cocked an eyebrow at Morgan in response. I saw a ghost underwater, Celeste said, as she hunted in the fridge. Underwater? I didn't know they could go underwater. Jolene scraped a thick blob of cream cheese frosting from the top of the cake and licked it off the fork. Earlier in the summer, she'd been a bit taken aback when Celeste had mentioned she had seen their grandmother's ghost. But after several reported sightings, it didn't really faze her much anymore. Especially after what happened in Skinner's garage earlier that day. Apparently they can. Celeste pulled her head out of the fridge, a bag of spinach, and a plastic container of mixed fruit in her hand. And he led me to a huge underwater cave out by the point. What was in it? Jolene asked. I don't know. I didn't go in. Celeste dumped the ingredients into the high-powered blender, along with ice cubes and water, and turned it on. Oh, and I found this, Celeste yelled over the motor as she dug the coin out of her pocket and put it on the island in front of Jolene. Jolene picked up the coin, noticing how smooth it felt as she turned it over in her hand. This looks like a Spanish treasure coin, like the one we dug up in the yard this summer, she said, after Celeste turned off the blender and she was able to hear again. Celeste nodded as she sipped her drink. So, there is a treasure down there. Jolene glanced out the window toward the ocean. We'll have to watch out for those guys from the Naughty Mariner and their underwater metal detectors. Yeah, Luke has some guys on watch over there to make sure no one comes in by boat, Morgan said. What about you? Did you have any luck with the search for Mateo? Celeste asked Jolene. Jolene blanched. Not really, but I think I ran into the pirates. Ran into them? Where? Morgan's eyes were clouded with concern. Well, I happened to drive by Skinner's house, and I noticed the side door to the garage was open, Jolene started. Why did you go there? Celeste cut in. Just checking the house, to make sure no one broke in. Jolene looked down, pushing the crumbs on her plate around with her fork. Anyway, there were two gigantic guys with beards taking a notebook out. I thought it might be from Skinner's journal. I tried to stop them, and something very strange happened. You tried to stop them? Morgan's eyes were wide. That seems dangerous. Jolene shrugged. Yeah, I probably should have run away, but I put my hand up to ward them off, and I felt this rush of energy through my palm. Then one guy flew backwards and crashed against the wall. It was weird, Jolene said, wiping her tingling palm on her jeans. Celeste narrowed her eyes at Jolene. You mean like some sort of paranormal force? Yes, exactly. Why not? You see ghosts, Morgan has intuition, and we all saw what Fiona's healing crystals did for my arm. Jolene looked down at her arm, which had been cut badly when the treasure hunters had broken into their home earlier in the summer. Fiona had wrapped it for her and put one of her crystals, a carnelian, in the wrapping. The next day, the cut had been totally healed. So, I don't think it's so weird that I have some special ability too. Is it? Not at all. Celeste pressed her lips together. I wonder if that's what Nana meant. Huh? I was talking to her, her ghost, this morning, and she said we were stronger than we know. I wonder if she was talking about our strange abilities. Maybe there is more to them than we realize, Celeste said. Well, I don't know how useful it is, Jolene said. I have no idea how to make it happen again. Is that how you got away from the pirates then? Morgan asked. No, at least I don't think so. After the guy got slammed into the wall, they were coming after me, and I tried to run, but I slipped and blacked out. The next thing I knew, I was outside and some pervert was feeling me up.
Oh.
What?
Duh.
Morgan and Celeste gave her identical looks, their brows rising to meet their hairlines.
What?
Yeah, some weird guy was there, and I felt him touching my butt.
Oh!
Jolene put her hand on her backside, right where she remembered the man touching her, and heard the crunch of paper. Her forehead creased as she reached into her back pocket and pulled out a wrinkled piece of notepaper. She didn't remember putting anything in there. What's that? Morgan asked. Not sure. Jolene spread it out on the top of the island. It looks like some sort of maze. Celeste bent over the paper, which showed a series of passages laid out like a maze, along with lines and arrows. It was recently hand-drawn in pen on white-lined paper, and a map of how to navigate it. Morgan reached out, picking up the paper and holding it in her hands. She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, Jolene felt her heart skip at the serious look they conveyed. We're going to need this. I don't know why, but I have a feeling that it's important. Do you think it has something to do with the treasure? Jolene asked. Morgan nodded. We better keep it safe. Maybe you can put it with the journal, Morgan? Celeste said. Okay, I'll take it up right after we're done here. Morgan put the map back down on the counter so they could study it some more. Meow. Belladonna stole their attention from the paper. Hi, Belladonna. Morgan slid out of her seat to pet the cat, who sat in front of the basement door, staring at them and flicking her tail. I have no idea why, but she seems to be obsessed with that basement, Celeste said. Maybe it's because of this. Fiona came into the room, holding a dustpan out in front of her like it was filled with toxic waste. Jolene craned her neck to see what was in it and understood why her sister was holding it that way when she saw the two headless mice. Ew. Celeste, Jolene, and Morgan scrunched their faces.
Belladonna.
Where did you get those? Celeste asked. They were on the front porch, neatly lined up in front of the door, like a gruesome present.
Hmm.
The four of them looked at Belladonna, who puffed up her chest proudly. You think she's getting mice from the basement? Morgan asked. Maybe. Fiona shoved the mice into a trash bag, securing it tightly and heading in the direction of the outside trash barrels. We should have one of the guys check it out and see if she is getting in from some window or opening and secure it. We don't want the treasure-hunting pirates to have an easy way in. I'll talk to Luke, Morgan said, as Fiona shoved the bag outside. What's that? Fiona joined them at the island, pointing to the map of the maze. We're not sure. A map of a maze or something. Jolene told her what had happened at Skinner's. So, you think the guy put it in your pocket? Jolene pressed her lips together. Maybe that was why I woke to find his hands on my butt.
Ah!
Who is he? Fiona asked. No idea, Jolene shrugged.
I like him.
What did he look like? He had a dark complexion, like maybe he was from Brazil or Cuba or something. Dark wavy hair and dark eyes, and a slight accent. Jolene saw Morgan and Celeste exchange a glance. That sounds like the mysterious Mateo. Well, if it is, I think he's following me because I also saw him staring at me in the museum parking lot, Jolene said.
Oh, snap.
Fiona's forehead creased. Why would he follow you? Who knows? Apparently, he must be connected to this whole treasure thing somehow, Jolene said. Sure seems that way, Fiona agreed. Yeah, it sure does, Celeste added. But the question is, whose side is he on? I didn't find any openings where someone could get into the basement. Luke shoved a pair of thick gloves halfway into his back pocket and bent down to brush dirt from his knees. He motioned for Celeste and Morgan to get up from where they sat on the front steps of their porch and follow him around the side of the house. He pointed to the granite slabs that sat under the cedar shingle siding. Your foundation is really old. There's no windows or even a bulkhead. There's really no way for a person to get in. But there might be some cracks a cat could wriggle through. Anyway, I don't think we need to worry about pirates getting in that way. Speaking of pirates, Celeste said, did you have any luck at the motel where Jolene took the pictures? Luke rubbed his hand over his chin, the day-old stubble making a rasping noise as he passed over it. As a matter of fact, we did. You won't have to worry about those two, but more will be coming. From what little information we could get, it seems there is some really big deal about a really low tide.
Dead
I
tide.
guess they have some plan that centers around that. A shiver crawled up Celeste's spine. Low tide? I read that Friday there's going to be an unusually low tide. The lowest one in almost 300 years. Dead tide, they called it. Something about the alignment of the sun and the moon. We figure they'll be coming from the open ocean. I guess there really is some treasure sunken out there. Luke thrust his chin toward the Atlantic. So, we only have 3 days? Morgan squinted at Luke. Seems that way. I'll have my men positioned to watch the Atlantic. So, if anyone comes in that way, we'll know about it. What about the underwater cave I saw the other day? Celeste asked. We'll check that out too. I have some guys that know how to dive, and we're going to scour the area tomorrow, Luke said. Do you want to dive with us? Celeste made a face. I'd like to, but I have yoga classes most of the day. What's with this whole low tide thing, though? Maybe the treasure is too deep at high tide? Morgan offered. Maybe, but if so, that would mean it was further out, not near the cliff, Celeste said. I'll make sure my guys check the deeper waters. Even if we can't get to it until Friday, we should be able to see if something is there, Luke offered. But in the meantime, we really need to start trying to figure out what Skinner knew, so I can get an idea of what those pirates have planned. It could help us ward off the attack. Do you think that map of the maze is a clue? Morgan raised her brows at Luke. They'd shown him the paper that had been placed in Jolene's pocket earlier, and he'd been as mystified as they were. Luke shrugged. Possibly, but where is this maze? Could it be underwater? Maybe Isaiah hid the treasure in the rocks or something, and that map shows how to get it, Celeste said. Morgan wrinkled her brow. The maze seemed a little too geometric to be from the natural rock. But maybe Isaiah rearranged the rocks or carved out crevices. That would make sense. I'll look for any abnormalities in rock structure while we're out there. Luke draped his arm over Morgan's shoulders and nuzzled her neck. Celeste took the hint and turned back toward the front of the house, cautiously looking for dead mice as she walked up the steps. She pulled the door open, taking one last glance out over the ocean. All the while, her stomach sinking, an imaginary stopwatch ticking off off the seconds in her mind until the treasure-hunting pirates descended on them. Chapter 13. The next day, Celeste found it difficult to concentrate on yoga. She finished her classes early and headed home right after. Slipping in through the front door, she shrugged out of her light jacket and slipped off her shoes. The yoga classes she taught earlier in the day had left her feeling an odd combination of drained and refreshed. She needed some wheatgrass juice and an apple before she relaxed into her afternoon meditation. Padding into the kitchen in bare feet, her heart stopped when she looked toward the basement door. It was wide open. Was someone down there? Celeste crossed cautiously to the door. Neither her nor her sisters ever went into the basement. The door was never open like this. In fact, they usually kept it locked. Maybe Luke had opened it yesterday when he was inspecting it? She was sure the door had been closed tight last night, and Luke hadn't been back since. She peered down the stairs into the darkness. Hello? Meow. The sound was so faint, she wasn't even sure she'd heard it. Belladonna? Was the cat down there hurt? Meow.
Oh.
Another pathetically soft meow filtered up from below. Are you hurt, kitty? Celeste felt a tug at her heart. The cat could be down there stuck or injured. She could have fallen in the well or gotten into something.
There's a well down
She
there?
had to go down, no matter how scared she was. She groped along the wall lightly, looking for the light switch, her shoulders tensing, her arm getting ready to pull back if her fingers encountered anything crawly or slimy. She found the hard plastic switch and flicked it, peering down into the basement, which was now slightly dim instead of pitch black. She stepped lightly on the first step, then the second. The cold air of the basement came up to surround her as she slowly descended the steps. The damp, musty smell tickled her nose. Her eyes strained to get used to the dim lighting. Belladonna! She stood with her left foot on the bottom step, her right hovering in the air, uncertain whether she should continue or turn and flee back up the steps. Meow. The sound came from her left. Celeste's heart crunched. Belladonna sounded weak as a kitten. Looking in that direction, she could barely see something white in the corner. The cavernous basement was lit by one low-wattage bulb, which hung from the ceiling about 20 feet away. The arc of light barely reached the area from where the sound came. Her stomach fluttered as she stepped off the last step. The compacted dirt floor of the basement felt damp and clammy on her bare feet. She realized she should have put shoes on before venturing down. Too late now, she thought, as she tiptoed her way across the floor toward the cat. Meow. Belladonna greeted her as she approached. The cat was wedged behind something big and round. It was almost as tall as Celeste and about 3
Barrel?
feet wide. It sat against the wall. Belladonna, are you okay? She bent down to pet the cat and was rewarded with a loud purr. Did you get stuck? She stood up to inspect the offending piece. It was hard to see the details in the dark, but she could make out that it was wooden and round like a barrel with metal bands. A big giant wine cask. She tried to move it, but it wouldn't budge. It looked ancient, and she wondered if there was still wine in it. Why else would it be so heavy? She peered around to where it was wedged against the wall, her heart jerking when she came face to face with a swirly white mist. A A ghost. And not just any ghost, the very same one that had lured her to the cave entrance during her dive. She jumped back, and the ghost looked insulted.
Oh, wow.
His long, dark, wavy hair hung down to his shoulders. Who was he? Hi, she ventured, still keeping a safe distance. He waved, then reached out his hand, causing her to jump back a little further. Then he inclined his head toward the wall, beckoning to her with his index finger, just like he had when he was trying to get her to swim further into the cave. Celeste frowned at him. Did he think she could go through the wall like he could? He reached out and grabbed her wrist. Her heartbeat picked up speed as she felt a cold mist wrap itself around her hand, the chill working its way up her arm. Her pulse drummed in her ears as she tried to pull away while he tried to pull her toward the dark crevice where the cask met the wall. She heard a faint knocking. Was that coming from the cask? The ghost nodded at her. The knocking got louder. She peered around the edge of the cask, feeling along the wall. It was wet and not all that pleasant. She jerked her hand away. Her heart beat faster. The ghost glanced up, then said, "Oops," and disappeared into the dark crack between the cask and the wall, leaving only a slight, swirly mist in his wake. What the heck? Celeste looked up, but didn't see anything. Then realized the knocking was turning into a pounding, and it wasn't coming from the cask. It was coming from upstairs, the front door. She glanced over at Belladonna, who slipped out of the
Overton,
crevice
for
and ran
crying
upstairs.
out loud, leave the sisters alone.
"Stupid cat wasn't even stuck," she muttered as she headed toward the front door to stop the incessant pounding before it gave her a migraine. Belladonna was already at the door, arching her back and hissing. Celeste shoved her aside and ripped the door open,
It's
her
Overton.
heart plummeting when she saw Overton standing on the other side, his fat knuckles raised toward the door in mid-knock. "What do you want?" she glared at the sheriff. He rocked back on his heels, a satisfied smirk spreading across his face as he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a piece of paper.
Nope.
"I wouldn't be so uppity if I were you."
Oh, shit.
He waved the paper in her face. "You and that dark-haired sister of yours are suspects in a murder case.
Which one?
And this here is a warrant to search the premises." Celeste's heart skipped. "Murder? What murder?" "Reinhardt Skinner."
Oh.
Overton
Fuck
tried to
off.
push his way past her into the house, his foul breath assaulting her nose, the toothpick wiggling up and down between his lips as he stared at her with rheumy eyes. Celeste barred his way by wedging her body in the door, her hip on one side and her arm stretched across to the other. "What? We didn't kill Skinner. A dozen people saw me sitting with him when he died, and I tried to revive him." "Conveniently sitting with him when he was poisoned, you mean?" Overton raised a bushy brow at her.
Not convenient.
"What? That's ridiculous. You can't get a search warrant on that flimsy evidence. You have no legitimate reason to suspect me or Morgan."
Yep.
Overton's laugh chilled Celeste's blood. "Actually, I have two. Skinner was poisoned with aconite.
Uh-huh.
That's a poison that comes from a plant. Wolfsbane. That plant is growing right out in your garden."
How do you know that?
He paused, jerking his head in the direction of Morgan's herb garden. Celeste pressed her lips together. Was that the toxic plant Morgan had warned her against? "And if that wasn't enough," Overton continued on, "we found your fingerprints, and those of your sister, all over Skinner's office."
Okay, so what? Can we get Delphine in
Chapter
here?
14. Overton tried to push Celeste out of the way,
No.
but she held her ground. They were grappling in the doorway like a pair of angry lovers when Delphine Jones's Toyota
Yes!
Camry skidded to a stop in the driveway.
Thank you!
Overton stopped battling Celeste, and they both turned to see Delphine leap out of her car and run up the walkway.
How does she know?
Her loose purple jacket flying out behind her, reminding Celeste of a superhero come to save the day.
Uh-huh.
How did she know to come here at the exact right time? You hold it right there, Overton. Delphine narrowed her eyes at the sheriff and received an unfriendly scowl in return. Delphine was the area's best lawyer and had helped the Blackmore girls on several occasions, most of which involved Overton wrongly accusing them of something and trying to put them in jail. Delphine and Overton were arch enemies. The feisty attorney never missed an opportunity to make him miserable.
Oh, yeah.
I have a warrant. Overton held up the papers. Let me see that. Delphine grabbed at them, and Overton handed them over reluctantly. Jake's Suburban came racing into the driveway, stopping beside Delphine's car.
Uh-huh.
Morgan, Fiona, and Jake tumbled out, charging up the steps to join them. Are you okay?
Uh-oh.
Morgan asked Celeste. Celeste nodded. What are you guys doing here?
How'd you?
I heard about the warrant being issued, Jake said, earning a venomous glare from Overton. Fiona called Delphine, and we got here as fast as we could. There's a problem with these. Delphine looked up at Overton. I'm afraid you'll have to come back later, with the proper papers. Overton frowned at the petite attorney. What do you mean? Everything should be in order. I had Judge Sanderson sign it and everything. Yes, but he didn't sign in the right place. Delphine pointed to a spot on the paper. What? That's just, technicality, Overton sputtered, his face turning red. Delphine shrugged, handing the papers to him. Well, we have to follow the letter of the law. I'm afraid you'll have to get Sanderson to sign it properly before I can let you invade my client's home. Overton's face twisted with anger as he grabbed the papers from Delphine. Have it your way, but I will be back this afternoon, and I will find the evidence I need. He fixed Celeste with an angry glare as he stormed down the steps and into his squad car, where two of his uniformed officers had been waiting. They watched him drive off. Then Delphine turned to Celeste. What's this about? Celeste puffed out her cheeks. As usual, Overton wants to pin a murder on us. This time, it's Reinhard Skinner, a historian we hired to look at one of the old journals we found in the attic. He was murdered? What evidence does he have to tie it to you? He was poisoned, Celeste said. According to Overton, the killer used aconite. Morgan's breath hitched. Aconite? But that's from the wolfsbane plant. Yeah, and Overton said we have that in our garden. We do, Morgan said. It has certain medicinal properties, but if abused, can be toxic. So he got a search warrant based on the fact that you have this plant growing in your garden? Is it uncommon? Delphine swiveled her head between Celeste and Morgan. Not really, Morgan said. I mean, not everyone would have it, but I'm sure this isn't the only place in Maine where the plant is growing. That wasn't the only thing, Celeste said. He also found our fingerprints in Skinner's office. Celeste saw realization spread across Morgan's face. From when we were there looking for the book? Celeste nodded. But that seems flimsy too, Morgan said. We hired him, so it makes perfect sense we would have been in his office. Celeste was glad she left off the part about how their trip to his office had been after he died. You're right. Both of those are flimsy. Delphine waved her arms like a purple bird. But somehow, Overton got a judge to sign off on a search warrant. I don't doubt that he's up to no good, though. I've suspected that since he came to this town. Me too, Jake said. Well, at least you got rid of him for now. Celeste looked at her watch. But I wonder how long it will take for him to come back. He only needs to go across town to see the judge. He could be back in an hour. Oh, he won't be back today. A sly smile spread across Delphine's face. I happen to know that Sanderson is playing golf all afternoon. He won't be back in chambers until tomorrow morning. Celeste's shoulders relaxed slightly. That's great. So we have the rest of the day. Although, I don't know what we need it for. We aren't guilty of anything, but somehow I feel like Overton is going to find something to make us look guilty. And we have to figure out what it is and make sure we don't have it. Don't worry. I'll be back here first thing to make sure he doesn't overstep his bounds and to counter any of his bogus findings, Delphine assured them. Well, thanks so much for coming. You're a lifesaver. Celeste hugged the other woman, and they went through a round of goodbyes before Delphine got into her Toyota and sped off. Fiona turned to the others, her arms spread at her sides. Now what do we do? Celeste puffed out her cheeks. I guess the only thing we can do is go over what we know about Skinner and this whole treasure business, so we're prepared to deal with anything Overton may come up with. We need this like a hole in the head, what with the pirates coming in 3 days. Morgan glanced nervously.
Just give
toward
everything to
the ocean.
Jake. You know you can trust
I
him.
wish I knew why Overton was so hell-bent on pestering you guys, Jake said. Me too. Celeste's stomach churned, and she remembered how hungry she was. Let's call Luke and Cal and see if we can get their input. I could use a snack while we're waiting for them. Anyone want some wheatgrass juice? Chapter 15. No one else wanted wheatgrass juice, so Celeste made some for herself, and then filled a bucket with water to soak her feet, which were black with the dirt from the cellar floor. She was relaxing on the front porch swing, with her feet in the bucket, when Cal's Mustang pulled into the driveway.
Aww.
He looked comfortable in worn jeans and half-zipped faded blue hoodie
Aww.
over a navy blue t-shirt. The night was cool, but not cold. The ocean breeze ruffled his hair slightly as he walked up the porch steps. When he sat down on the swing beside her, Celeste felt a wave of relief spread over her. Cal always made things seem better when they were going wrong.
Aww.
And things were going very wrong right now. What's with the feet? He gestured toward the bucket. Oh, I had to go rescue Belladonna in the basement, and I was barefoot. It's a dirt floor down there, and my feet were filthy. I'm trying to get them clean, but I think they might be turning into prunes by now. She lifted one foot halfway out, frowning at the puckered white skin. Cal leaned over, grabbed her foot, and wrapped it in the towel she had beside her on the swing, just for that purpose. He rubbed it dry, then put it in his lap and massaged it gently,
Aww.
causing a flurry of strange, tingly sensations to flood Celeste's belly.
Oh.
Which was odd, because she'd never felt this way before. Well, at least not with Cal. He was a friend, nothing more. Besides, he had way too many women on his plate as it was, and she didn't want to be just another notch. Her odd feelings were likely just a reaction to all this crazy stuff going on around them anyway. She pulled her foot away, her heart crunching at the hurt look on his face.
Aww.
So, what did you guys want to talk about?
Oh.
He asked. She took her other foot out of the bucket and grabbed the towel, rubbing the foot dry as she told him about Luke's discovery that the pirates were going to come at low tide in 3 days. Yeah, I remember reading something about that. It will be the lowest it's ever been, but why is that significant? Celeste shrugged. I have no idea. All we can figure out is that the treasure might be somewhere that you can only get to at the low tide. Would the low tide expose some sort of beach or sandbar? You know, one that would be impossible to dig out when it was underwater? Celeste straightened in the seat. You know, that's not a bad idea. I'm not sure where one would be, though. I've never seen an exposed beach or sandbar. The water around here is over 50 feet deep. Do you think the tide could get lower than that? Don't know. I've never really looked at the shore during low tide here. When I swim, I go to Noakwood Beach. But you know how far the low tide goes out there. Stands to reason the same would happen here. Celeste shook her head. When we were little girls, we played near the water all the time, and we never saw a sandbar. But maybe the tide was never anywhere near this low. Right. Cal studied her. Did something else happen? You look really stressed.
Aww.
Celeste told Cal about Overton's visit, her stomach sinking lower and lower as she relayed everything that happened. When she finished, she was practically in tears. I'm sure he'll be coming here first thing tomorrow, and we'll have to deal with that while trying to figure out where the treasure is before the pirates get here. Cal put his arm around her, pulling her in close. His arm felt warm and comforting, and a little more than just friendly. Don't worry. Between all of us, I'm sure we'll figure something out. His sapphire eyes studied hers, his free hand coming up to trace the line of her bottom lip,
Aww.
causing her stomach to flip over. But what if he arrests us? She whispered. I'll make sure he doesn't, Cal said.
Aww.
He leaned in, and the next thing she knew, his lips were brushing hers.
Oh, snap!
Celeste felt like time had stopped. Her lips seemed to have a mind of their own as they reacted to Cal's kiss by pressing closer against his. They surprised her by parting slightly, and her tongue, which apparently had its own ideas, darted out to meet his. She sighed and relaxed into the kiss, listening to the evening sound of crickets, smelling the clean scent of ocean breeze, and tasting the spicy taste of Cal's lips.
Oh, snap.
And then her brain kicked into gear. What was she doing? Cal was like a brother to her, although there was nothing brotherly about his kiss, or the way his hands were starting to explore her body.
Oh.
She had to admit it wasn't all that unpleasant.
Aww.
She realized it had been way too long since she dated anyone. But the last thing she needed right now was to get involved with someone, especially someone who had a little black book the size of the Bible. She needed Cal as a friend more than anything. Plus, she wasn't interested in a short fling with anyone, and certainly not with someone as important to her as he was. Her brain managed to get a signal through to her hand, which she discovered had somehow entangled itself in Cal's hair.
Oh.
And she put her palm flat on his chest. She felt the warmth through his shirt, and the hard muscle. She briefly wondered what the rest of him felt like, but then common sense took over, and she pushed harder with her palm. Cal broke the kiss, looking at her with confusion.
Aww.
What's wrong? Celeste raised her brows. Wrong? You kissed me.
Uh-huh.
Cal smiled, leaning in for more. Yes, and I plan to do it again.
Oh!
Celeste scrambled away from him. I don't think this is such a good idea.
Oh,
Why
fudge.
not? We're friends. I don't want to screw that up. Cal bit his lip, his eyes clouding over with something. Disappointment? He reached over and took her hand. We could be more than friends. Celeste pulled her hand away and shot up out of the chair. I don't think so. I'm not one of your disposable girlfriends. I would hope you would think more of me, she said, then turned and ran into the house. Celeste, wait, he called after her. I do think more of you. She didn't hear him. Her mind was whirling with emotions and questions. Part of her wanted to run as far away as her legs would take her. But with everything going on here, she couldn't let her sisters down. She slowed her pace and stilled her mind, then headed for the informal living room. Her ears vaguely registered the sound of the front door opening behind her as she entered the room. Luke, Jake, and her 3 sisters were gathered in the informal living room. They lounged in the overstuffed chairs and on the sofa. Fiona had a piece of paper and a pencil, and they looked like they had been busy formulating a plan at one time. Except now, everyone was staring at her.
Oh.
Or did it just feel that way? Is everything okay? Morgan asked. The heat crept up Celeste's neck into her cheeks. Yes, fine. What's going on? I thought I heard someone yelling, Luke said. Oh, hi, Luke. When did you get here? Celeste asked, trying to turn the focus of the conversation away from her. I've only been here a few minutes. Came in the kitchen door. Cal came into the room just then, and Celeste skirted behind the chairs, standing, arms crossed, next to the window on the other side of the room. Celeste noticed her sisters ping-ponging their eyes between her and Cal, and her cheeks got hotter. So, are you guys working on a plan? She asked, hoping to steer the conversation to something important. Well, the way I see it, we have 2 problems. Overton's search tomorrow, and the bigger problem of those treasure-hunting pirates, Jake said. Whatever the pirates are after can only be accessed at this really low tide that is happening in 3 days, Luke said. But that doesn't mean they won't actually come here sooner. My men have been able to get some more information from the guys we caught at the hotel, and it's worse than we thought. Celeste's stomach sank. She didn't want to know how they were getting information from the motel guys, or what they planned to do with them after, but this didn't sound good. How so? They work for a particularly nasty fellow named Goldlinger. Luke took a deep breath. We've tangled with him before, and he's not afraid to have his minions kill to get what he wants. I'm afraid they might come early and try to get you girls out of the way. By out of the way, you mean kill us, right? Jolene asked. Afraid so. Wait a minute, Jake said. What did you say the guy's name was? Goldlinger. Jake pursed his lips. When I worked for Overton, I used to eavesdrop outside his office. I knew he was up to something, and I figured the more ammunition I had about him, the better. I heard him addressing someone on the other end of the phone as Goldlinger. Not once, but several times. Celeste's heart kicked. You don't think Overton is in on it with this Goldlinger guy? Jake shrugged. It sure would explain a lot. Yes, it would, Morgan said. Like why he's always trying to put us in jail. To get us out of the way, Fiona added. And that might be why he's so keen on getting this search warrant, Cal said. If he is in on it with Goldlinger, he might be trying to search the house for the journal or other clues. Right. Jolene leaned forward in her chair, elbows on knees. We know they have the notebook they took from Skinner's and possibly the cipher key, the poetry book. But they probably don't have all the pieces to piece together the location of this big find of Skinner's. Ironically, they're in the same boat as us, Jake said. We have the pieces they need, and they have the pieces we need. And Overton could be after those pieces, Celeste said. He's probably not even looking for anything to do with Skinner's death. He's coming to search the house for clues to the treasure. Cal looked at Celeste from across the room. Well, if he is coming to look for clues, then I say we give him exactly what he wants. Celeste screwed up her face. Are you crazy? Why would we do that? Cal laughed. Not the real clues. Fake ones. Something that will throw them off track. Luke nodded. What a great idea. That's brilliant. Yeah, but what fake clue? We don't even know what the real clues are. How will we know how to fake one? Jolene asked. Let's figure out what we do know, Morgan said. We know there's some big find. We'll call it a treasure since Skinner said it could be valuable, Celeste answered. And we know that there's already bad guys here looking for it. For some reason, the low tide is significant, and apparently, they don't know all the information they need to figure out where it is. Jolene ticked the 3 items off with her fingers. And we
They're
have
dumb.
a journal and a mysterious map of a maze, Celeste added, then turned to Luke. Did you guys find any sign of treasure or an underwater maze on your dive? No, we didn't even see anything that could come close. We did find an old brass cross and some pewter mugs scattered around the ocean floor, but no treasure. What about that cave? Luke raised his brows. That was interesting. The opening is gigantic, but the top is about 20 feet down, so you would never see it from the ocean. Anyway, we swam in quite a ways. It goes into the cliff pretty far, but part of it was blocked with rubble. From the explosion earlier in the summer? Jolene asked. Maybe, I'm not sure. We had to back out since we'd been diving all day and the oxygen was running low. Did you see any sandbars out in the ocean? Celeste asked, remembering her conversation with Cal, and then feeling her cheeks grow warm again.
Oh!
Luke shook his head. No. Why do you ask? I was just wondering if this whole timing with the lowest tide might be because a sandbar is exposed. You know, somewhere that would be easier to dig up a treasure if it wasn't covered in water. Luke rubbed his chin with his thumb and forefinger. You know, that's not a bad theory. We should get a geographical map of the ocean floor all around the cliff. He pulled out his cell phone and punched in a text. So, we still don't know where this maze is, or even how it is connected, Celeste said. Can I see this maze map? Cal asked. Sure. Morgan stood up. I put it with the journal in my secret hiding place upstairs. I'll run up and get it. So, where do you guys think this maze is, anyway? Fiona asked. Everyone shrugged.
I didn't know
It
this.
must be here, on or near our land, or the pirates wouldn't be coming here, Celeste said. Do you think Skinner discovered exactly where it is? Morgan asked, as she slipped back into the room, placing the maze map on the coffee table, in front of where Cal was seated. Hard to tell. Luke stood behind Cal and looked down at the map. If he did, the pirates probably know exactly where it is too. But if they do, why wouldn't they just be here, now, digging it up? Jolene's brows mashed together as she stared at Luke. Luke gave a half head shake, half shrug. Either they can't get it because of the level of the tide, or they are waiting for the final piece of the puzzle. What's the final piece of the puzzle? Fiona asked. The map that shows exactly how to get to the treasure, Cal said, tapping his index finger on the maze map. You think that's what the map shows? Jolene squatted down on the other side of the table. Sure. See these arrows and thin lines? Cal traced his finger along the lines on the map. These show you what path to take in the maze. So, the thicker lines are the walls of the maze? Jolene asked. Yes, it looks that way. Cal narrowed his eyes across the table with Jolene. Did the man that gave you this say anything about it? She shook her head. No, I didn't even know he had slipped it into my pocket until later. Well, it has to have some significance to this whole treasure thing. This could be the very map that leads us to the treasure, Cal said. Or it could be a ruse. Something to throw us off track, Celeste argued. No, I have a feeling it's very important. This isn't a ruse. Morgan looked at Celeste and then at the others. I have a very strong feeling about it. Okay then, if Overton is working for Goldlinger, this could be exactly what he is looking for, Jake said. So, we make a fake map and hide it somewhere that Overton will find it. If we are right, then the pirates will end up following the wrong path in the maze and come up to a dead end and no treasure. Jake thumped Cal on the back. Excellent idea. So based on what we know, it would seem that pirates know where the maze is, but not how to navigate it. And we know how to navigate it, but not where it is, Celeste said. Right, Luke said. If Overton bites on the fake clue, then we'll know for sure that he's in on it with them. The fake map will keep them from getting to the treasure, but it won't solve our immediate problem, Jake said. You mean that the pirates could come to get us out of the way any time now? Jolene asked. Jake nodded, causing Celeste's heart to sink. That's why we need to find that poetry book right away, Cal said. Because our only hope now is to find the treasure first, before they have a chance to hurt the girls. And in order to do that, we need to decipher the journal just like Skinner did. Chapter 16. Celeste stared out the front window, her stomach churning in anticipation of Overton's arrival. Her gaze wandered over to the porch swing that she and Cal had sat on the night before, and her heart pinched. He'd left last night without even saying goodbye to her. Was pushing him away what she really wanted? She wondered if she'd done the wrong thing and lost her best friend. From her vantage point at the window, she could see the road that led through Perkins Cove to their driveway. Her shoulders tensed as the no-quit police cruiser rounded the corner to the cove and sped its way down the road toward her. It pulled to a stop in front of her house, and Overton lumbered out with 2 uniformed officers behind him. I'll handle him. Delphine, who had arrived moments before, opened the front door, greeting Overton with a stony face and an outstretched hand. Overton pushed the papers toward her, hitching up his pants and chewing on his toothpick. As Delphine inspected them, her mouth set in a grim line. She glanced over at Celeste and her sisters, who had now gathered in the entranceway, then handed the papers back to Overton. They're in order. We'll have to let him in. She stepped aside and held the door open. Overton passed through the door, pausing only to aim a menacing glare at Celeste and her sisters. Overton pointed to one of the cops. Blake, you take this floor. I'll take the 2nd floor, and Towers can take the 3rd floor. The 2 cops nodded and took off to their respective floors.
How do they know?
Celeste exchanged a look with her sisters. Overton hadn't mentioned the attic, which she thought was weird, but she was grateful, since she didn't want him messing around with their family heirlooms. Overton disappeared down the hallway, toward the stairs leading to the 2nd floor. Meow! Damn cat! Overton's voice bellowed through the house. Celeste suppressed a giggle when Belladonna came skittering into view, unharmed. She must have inadvertently gotten in Overton's way on the stairs. Belladonna winked at her lazily, and she wondered if the cat had known exactly what she was doing.
I
had
love
some
all
fresh
that.
blueberries. Who wants to make blueberry muffins? Morgan raised her brows and
Me.
gestured toward the kitchen.
Okay, I like chocolate chip.
Celeste's stomach nagged,
I like
reminding
muffins.
her she had forgotten to eat supper. I do. Me too, Fiona and Jolene said at the same time, and then punched each other lightly in the arm. I'm going to make sure Overton and his gang don't do anything inappropriate, Delphine said,
Mostly protect the
turning
fourth
in
floor.
a flurry of tangerine and yellow. The feisty lawyer was known for her colorful outfits, and today she chosen a loose tangerine jacket made from some semi-sheer material, which topped off a yellow shirt and yellow, orange, and pink skirt. Quite a contrast to her black yoga pants and white t-shirt, Celeste thought, as she followed her sisters into the kitchen. Celeste, you grab the ingredients. Jolene, get the muffin cups and pan. Fiona, grab the mixer and a big bowl, Morgan directed from the stove, where she was preheating the oven. Celeste assembled sugar, flour, baking powder, milk, and butter on the kitchen island. Fiona put the large stainless steel mixing bowl from their KitchenAid mixer beside them. Morgan brought over a measuring cup and measured out the ingredients, dumping them in the bowl in turn. We'll fold the blueberries in by hand after this is all mixed together. Morgan pointed to a pint of oversized blueberries that sat on the kitchen counter as she fitted the steel bowl in the mixer base, lowered the paddle, and turned it on. The sisters had a row of blueberry bushes that grew on the cove side of the yard. It was well past blueberry season now, but they always picked the bushes clean in the season and froze them for later. Morgan must have taken these out of the freezer last night. Celeste leaned over in her chair, grabbed one, and popped it in her mouth.
Oh.
An explosion of juicy, sweet tartness coated her tongue as she bit down. These are really juicy, she said, then stuck out her tongue. Is my tongue blue? The words came out garbled, but her sisters knew what she meant. Yes, they answered in unison. Celeste crossed her eyes, trying to look at her tongue to see how blue it was. A crash came from upstairs, and they all flinched as they heard Delphine yell at Overton. You better not break any of my clients' things, or you'll be paying for it. It was that damn cat knocked it over. Overton's voice echoed down to them. It's not broken. The girls tore their eyes from the ceiling, and Morgan started folding the blueberries into the batter, while Jolene plunked a thin, pleated paper muffin cup into each section of the pan. Fiona poured the batter into the muffin cups, and they shoved the pan into the oven. Then they took a seat at the kitchen island and waited. Mixing the muffins had been a nice diversion, but now they could hear the sounds of the search going on, and Celeste's heart grew heavy with dread. Jolene broke the silence. I wonder what he's going to take. He'll probably take the opportunity to steal some of our good stuff, Fiona said. I wouldn't be surprised. Morgan scowled at the ceiling.
Not allowed to.
Well, at least there's nothing that he can use to incriminate us, Celeste added. I'm just glad I brought my laptop over to Jake's, Jolene whispered. If he took that, I'd be out of business. Celeste nodded. They brought more than Jolene's laptop over to Jake's. The leather map and the silver box was over there as well, along with the poem they found in the lining and the real map of the maze. The fake map, which they'd made last night, was hidden in the fireplace in Celeste's room. They'd carefully drawn it in the same color pen on the same paper, taking care to make the path exactly the opposite of what it was in the original map. Luke had installed an inconspicuous camera directed at the spot, so they'd be able to tell right away if Overton took the bait. He was monitoring it from his apartment downtown. Morgan's cell phone erupted in a cacophony of chirps and tweets. She glanced over to where it sat on the kitchen island to see the message. It's Luke. She didn't need to elaborate. The other girls knew what it meant. Overton had taken the map. Towers, are you about done up there? Overton bellowed from the second floor. Seated in the kitchen, the sisters could hear the front stairs groan under his weight as he descended them. Go on, Blake, hurry it up. Overton's voice carried into the kitchen from the library. The timer on the oven dinged, and Morgan took the muffins out, just as Overton appeared in the door with Delphine and Blake behind him. So, you're done then? Delphine queried Overton. Yup. The toothpick bobbed around in his mouth as he eyed the steaming muffins. I'll need a copy of the inventory sheets, Delphine said. Celeste had seen them carry out a few bags during the course of their search. Everything the police took would be cataloged and written down. Celeste would bet good money the map of the maze wouldn't be on the list. The sound of footsteps running down the stairs and into the hall announced Towers' arrival. Overton turned and looked at the two cops. Did you get everything loaded into the car? Towers and Blake nodded. Then, I think we're done here. Overton's gaze shifted to the kitchen window, and his eyebrows went up. Except for one last thing.
Bitch.
He took an evidence bag out of his pocket and started toward the back door, motioning impatiently for Towers and Blake to follow.
What?
Without a word to Delphine or the sisters, he ripped open the door and stomped out.
Hold it, Overton.
Celeste watched as
I want to see that warrant again. I want to see that warrant again. Give me that warrant.
To the far corner. He paused and pulled a sheet of paper out of his pocket. It looked like a printout with a picture. Squinting at the paper, he leaned down to get a better look at the plants. After a few minutes, he found his target, wolfsbane. He ripped the wolfsbane plants out of the ground and shoved them in the plastic evidence bag. Morgan flinched.
You only need one.
Treatment of her herbs. Gee, I hope he didn't get any on his hands. He might accidentally poison himself, she said sarcastically, as they watched him walk.
Hopefully that wouldn't be a bad thing.
Two uniformed cops following him like obedient baby ducks. Delphine snorted out a laugh. Okay. Well, if you guys don't need me, I have to get back to the office. I don't think we need you. And thanks for coming. Want a muffin? Fiona held a napkin-wrapped muffin out. Sure. Delphine took the muffin. I'll get you a copy of the inventory list as soon as Overton gets it to me. And I'll keep my ears peeled for any more warrants. You don't think he's going to arrest one of us, do you? Jolene asked. You know, like he usually does. Delphine rolled her eyes. Unless he comes up with something concrete, I don't think he can. It's weird, though. He didn't take very much out of the house today. Celeste peeled the paper off the sides of her muffin. That's because he was really only after one thing. If he does try to arrest one of you, I'll have you out in a jiff. Delphine held the muffin up with a nod, then turned and disappeared toward the front door. Looks like Overton really is working for this Goldlinger guy. Jolene's eyes
Not surprised.
shone with excitement. I guess he has been all along, Morgan said. Yeah, all this time he's been trying to get us out of the way, trying to frame us for murder, and doing things so we would have a hard time paying the property taxes. Fiona twisted the crystal bracelet on her wrist as she talked. Celeste remembered how hard it had been to come up with the tax money on the seaside mansion before they discovered that they had some very valuable pieces in the attic. Overton had taken every chance he got to turn the screws on them so that they would struggle for money. I wonder if he was trying to run us out of the house so this Goldlinger could get whatever it is he is after, Morgan said. Looks that way, Jolene answered. So these pirates have had us in their sights for quite some time, Celeste said, shivering, an icy finger tracing its way up her spine. She bit into her muffin, the warm softness filling her mouth with sweet flavor. She closed her eyes to savor it, until a loud cracking sound from Fiona's side of the island made them fly open. What was that? Morgan turned from the sink, where she'd been washing the bowl. Fiona stood at the island, frowning down at her wrist. Celeste followed her gaze and saw one of the stones in her bracelet had shattered and was laying in pieces on the counter.
Oh, how'd that happen?
Did you smash your bracelet on the counter? She asked. Fiona shook her head. No, it just shattered on its own. That's weird, Morgan said. I never heard of a stone doing that before. They don't, usually. Fiona picked up one of the shards and studied it under the light. This stone is malachite. Ancient lore has it that the stone shatters to warn of impending danger. Celeste's throat went dry, almost causing her to choke on the piece of muffin she just swallowed. No shit, Jolene said. I'd say your stone is a little late with its warning. As if on cue, spooky science fiction music erupted from Jolene's pocket, and she pulled out her phone, slipping out of her chair and walking over to the other end of the kitchen to take the call. Morgan, Celeste, and Fiona bent over the shattered stone. Yeah, it's probably just a coincidence, Morgan shrugged. Yeah. Besides, we already know we're in danger, Celeste said. Yeah, hopefully it's not a sign that things are going to get worse, Fiona added. It's not, Jolene rejoined them. In fact, things are starting to look up for us. Really? Celeste's eyebrows flew up. How so? That was Skinner's brother. He wants to meet us over at Skinner's house. He said he has some of Skinner's notes and a poetry book that has to do with our case. Chapter 17. Reinhard Skinner's house was an old-fashioned 1940s farmhouse that sat on a tree-lined street. The four sisters parked across from it and approached from the front walkway. Does anyone else think it's strange that the door is open? Celeste's stomach tightened as she pointed to the front door that was slightly ajar. Maybe he left it open to air out the house, Jolene suggested. He did say he was cleaning it out, and it's been closed up for a few days. Maybe. Morgan's lips were pressed into a thin line. But I have a feeling that this might not be what we were hoping. The girls walked toward the door cautiously. Jolene first, with Celeste, Morgan, and Fiona close behind. Jolene knocked on the front door. Mr. Skinner? No one answered. Celeste's stomach tightened even more. Jolene pushed the door open slightly, the hinge creaking like a sound effect from a bad horror movie.
Yikes.
Hello? Jolene said into the house. No one answered. Jolene looked back at Celeste. Celeste shrugged. Jolene turned back around, pushed the door wide, and stepped into the house. Anyone home? Jolene ventured. Still no response. She crept further into the house. Celeste, Morgan, and Fiona came in behind her to stand in the small living room. The room was sparse, with a sofa, television, and recliner. An open can of soda sat on the coffee table, and a few boxes were stacked in the corner. A bookshelf next to the sofa stood empty, evidence that Skinner's brother had already started packing. Dust motes floated in the air. Something's not right. He said he'd be here. Jolene turned to head down a hallway to the left when they heard a noise from the back of the house. Celeste saw Morgan's eyes narrow as she put her finger up to her lips, cocking her ear in the direction of the noise. Jolene wasn't as cautious as Morgan, and she took off toward the back of the house. Jolene, no! Morgan tried to grab for her, but she was already out of reach, halfway through the dining room and closing in on the room the noise had come from. Celeste sprinted up behind her, and the two of them got to the opening that led into what must have been Skinner's study at the same time. Celeste's heart jolted. Two beefy men with long, scraggly hair and beards
Uh-oh.
appeared to be ransacking the office. Desk drawers were pulled open, their contents spilled on the floor. The filing cabinet's oak drawers gaped, and the bookshelf had been relieved of most of its books, which now lay strewn in a heap. She knew they weren't looking for valuables. An expensive bronze bust sat untouched on top of an oak side table. But the most alarming sight was the body slumped over the desk in a pool of blood.
No.
Skinner's brother, Celeste assumed. The two men's heads jerked up, their eyes narrowing at the sisters. Before Celeste could react, they threw down the papers they were holding and lunged toward her. Celeste instinctively crouched into a defensive karate stance. Beside her, she could see Jolene casting about for a weapon. Behind her, she could hear the sharp intake of breath as Morgan and Fiona joined them, in time to see the two large men lunging in their direction. She barely had time to register any of this when the largest of the men was practically on top of her. She thrust her palm out and up, taking advantage of his forward momentum to maximize the impact of the heel of her palm to his nose. She heard a crunch, and he jerked back, clutching his nose with a skull and crossbone tattooed hand, while issuing a string of curses. Beside her, the second man had tossed Jolene aside like she was a rag doll. Jolene teetered in the corner, but Morgan and Fiona were on him. Morgan sending him stumbling with a jab of her elbow into his gut, and Fiona jumping on his back.
Oh, yeah,
He
girl.
spun this way and that, his arms flailing behind him, his bicep bulging and distorting the mermaid tattooed in the center as he tried to dislodge her. The first man had recovered from the blow to his nose, which was leaking blood and already starting to swell. From the look on his face, he was beyond mad.
Uh-huh.
Panic clutched at Celeste's chest as she saw his huge hands reaching for her throat. She tried to back away, but wasn't quick enough. Her throat burned as he picked her up in the air, his hands squeezing. She could hear Jolene yelling at him to let go as her vision started to blur. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Jolene pick up a heavy paperweight from the desk and bash it into the side of the man's head. He let go and turned on Jolene. Celeste dropped to the floor, sputtering and rubbing her neck. She saw Jolene put up her forearm to ward the guy off. Behind her, Celeste could see the guy with the mermaid tattoo had shaken Fiona off his back and was turning on her. Celeste's eyes grew wide as she saw the green stone pendant on Fiona's neck start to glow. Softly at first, and then brighter and brighter, until it was almost pulsating. It must have surprised the attacker, too, because he was just standing there, staring at the pendant, when it exploded into pieces,
Oh, shit.
one of which embedded itself in his eye. Celeste felt the glow of satisfaction as the guy went down on one knee, shrieking like a girl.
Oh,
and holding his
yeah.
arm, blood seeping out from between his fingers.
No, that's what I'm talking
She
about.
didn't have long to revel in it, though, because old Skull and Crossbones had Jolene by the hair and looked like he was about to smash her face into the wall. Celeste looked around for something hard to hit him with. Where was that paperweight? Her hands fumbled for it as she kept one eye on Jolene, who was squirming and twisting, somehow managing to wiggle around and bash the man across the face with her fist. A spark of electricity arced out of Jolene's hand and seared a jagged line into the man's skin.
Yes!
He jumped back, his hands flying
You go,
protected
girl!
to his face. Celeste's fingers found a heavy vase, and she raised it above her head, daring the men to come after her.
Right, bro.
It slowed them down, but they still seemed hell-bent on fighting with her and her sisters. Mermaid Tattoo had stopped screaming and was starting to advance on her when something in the corner by the closet caught her eye. A swirly white mist that looked an awful lot like Reinhard Skinner. It seemed agitated, jumping up and down and pointing to the closet floor. The distraction proved to be unfortunate. Mermaid Tattoo rammed into her, knocking her to the floor. She dropped the vase, shooting her arm out to break the fall, and heard a sickening crunch as lightning-hot pain shot up her arm.
Uh-oh.
She glanced over at Skinner's ghost, who was still hopping up and down and pointing. He looked a little peeved that she wasn't paying enough attention to him. Couldn't he see that she was kind of busy? Her heart crunched as the guy with the mermaid tattoo loomed above her. She
Fuck that
tried
guy.
to stand, but with only one arm, all she managed to do was wobble around on the floor. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see the other guy recovering from being branded by Jolene.
Oh, God.
He was a mess, with a bloody nose and shiny scar. Judging by the roar he gave out before he lunged at Jolene, he must have been pissed. Celeste sat there on the floor, helplessly cradling her arm, leaning against the oak side table and watching as the man launched himself at her sister. She saw Jolene put her hand out to ward him off, then heard a sharp crackle like lightning, and saw a bright light right before the bronze bust toppled off the side table, cracking her skull and turning everything black.
Shit.
Chapter 18. Celeste's head felt like it had been dumped inside a cement mixer, and her eyelids seemed to be glued shut. Her throat burned. Her tongue felt thick and dry. She tried to move, her skin rasping against crisp linen sheets. A warm hand covered hers.
No.
Celeste? Was that Cal?
Please tell me this count.
Her heart swelled, and she struggled to open her eyes. She was surprised to discover how relieved she felt to hear his voice. She didn't realize how hurt she'd been when he'd left the night before without even saying goodbye, which had made her wonder if she'd made a mistake in pushing him away. She was starting to realize she had feelings for him that went beyond the friendship they'd shared for decades. That scared her. She'd learned early on never to depend on anyone but herself and her sisters. Even though Cal had always been there for her, he wasn't known for his long-term relationship skills. Would getting involved with him only end up in her getting hurt and the end of their friendship? You're okay. You're in the hospital. His voice ripped her out of her thoughts. Hospital? Why would she be in the hospital? Then the memory of the fight with the tattooed pirates came flooding back, and she jerked her eyes open, searching the room for her sisters. Are my sisters okay? She bolted upright in the bed, causing a wave of nausea and dizziness.
No.
Cal pushed her back down. They're fine. They just went to the cafeteria. She accepted the cup of water he handed her, sucking it down in one gulp, which made her throat burn a little less, and her tongue return to its normal size. The headache, on the other hand, was probably going to require something stronger. For the first time, she noticed her lower arm was in a cast. What the heck? She held it up, raising her
Must have
eyebrows at
broken it.
Cal. You broke your wrist and got a nasty bang on the head.
No.
No concussion, though, thankfully. Oh, I remember now. Your sisters told me you guys had quite a brawl.
Mhm.
Celeste laughed. Yeah, I think we beat the crap out of those guys, too. The concern in Cal's eyes melted her heart. Well, let's hope you guys don't make a habit out of it. Even though some of you seem to have some special skills in that department. Celeste chewed on her bottom lip, remembering how Fiona's necklace had exploded and Jolene's strange power. Talk about lightning reflexes. Cal's phone made a dinging noise, and he released her hand to answer it. From where she lay in the bed, she could see the name of the caller, Camilla. Her heart sank. She never used to mind when girls called her before. Her feelings were getting so complicated now. I have to take this. He stood and walked over to the window.
Oh.
She felt a warm tingle as she studied his face, silhouetted against the window.
Oh.
She'd always thought he was attractive in a brotherly sort of way. But now, what she was feeling was anything but sisterly. He snapped the phone shut and came over to the bed. I've got to go. I just wanted to stop in and make sure you were okay. Thanks for stopping by. She managed a weak smile. Okay. See you later. He turned and then disappeared out the door, without even a peck on the cheek. Celeste felt a hot poker stab her heart. He hadn't been his usual friendly self, and now he was running off to see Camilla. Her gut wrenched. Had she made the biggest mistake of her life by pushing him away after he'd kissed her? You're up, Fiona breezed into the room, a paper cup of coffee in her hand. Are you in pain? You look upset. No, Celeste forced a smile. I feel good. If you consider feeling like you drank a bottle of 151, got run over by a dump truck, and slept in a barn good. Fiona laughed. Well, you did get a nasty bump. You must have a whopper of a headache. Yeah. What happened back there? Celeste smiled at Morgan and Jolene, who joined them with their own paper cups. And where's my coffee? No coffee for you. Morgan handed her a bottle of orange juice. You're recovering. Celeste sipped the juice while she listened to her sisters recount what had happened after she got knocked out. Apparently, their attackers had been so freaked out after the lightning bolt, they fled. Jolene had called 911. An ambulance came for Celeste, and the police came for Skinner's brother. They did take the opportunity in between the bad guys leaving and the police arriving to search Skinner's office, but they didn't find anything.
Of course they didn't.
Weird, because the pirates left empty-handed. I'm surprised Overton didn't arrest one of you for the murder, Celeste said. Well, he did give us a hard time, but it almost seemed like his heart wasn't in it, Morgan answered. He was probably too excited about giving the map to Goldlinger, Fiona whispered over the rim of her cup. Celeste stared at the malachite shard hanging from her sister's necklace. Fiona's hand flew up to the shard, and the sisters shared an uneasy look. That pendant was malachite, the same as the stone that shattered in your bracelet, right? Celeste asked. Fiona nodded. I'd be careful about wearing malachite if I were you, Jolene joked. Yeah, well, I'll take your advice, since I don't want to get on your bad side. I hear you pack an electrifying punch, Fiona replied. The sisters laughed uneasily. Then Celeste said, Now, I know what Grandma meant the other day. What do you mean? Morgan asked. She said that we, meaning the four of us, Celeste waved her good hand around the room, were stronger than we know, and that we had skills to fight the evil forces that were coming. I think she was referring to our special, gifts. Yeah, weird gifts. Jolene looked at her hand. just wish I knew more about it and how to control it. Yeah, me too. Fiona fiddled with the broken pendant on her necklace. I don't even know what my gift is. Well, you seem to have some power with crystals and gemstones. It's no wonder you chose to be a gemologist, Celeste said, then turned to Morgan. Morgan has some kind of intuition. We've seen it a couple of times now. And Grandma even said for her to trust her gut instincts. Jolene has some sort of special energy. And I talk to dead people. I guess we just need to focus on honing our skills, so to speak. The same as you would develop any skill? Like learning to be good at tennis or drawing? Jolene asked. I think so. Morgan tossed her cup in the trash. So far, we've been ignoring our gifts or powers or whatever you want to call them. I guess it's time we started paying more attention and seeing how we can put them to good use. Speaking of which, Celeste pushed the sheets aside and dangled her legs off the side of the bed. I saw Skinner's ghost in that study when we were fighting those pirates. He seemed to be indicating that he wanted us to look at something on the bottom of the closet. She slid her feet onto the floor, standing cautiously, holding on to the bed railings. Fiona rushed over and took her elbow to help steady her. Are you sure you should be getting out of bed? Jolene's forehead wrinkled with concern. Sure, I only have a broken wrist. Besides, I have to get out of here ASAP so we can get over to Skinner's and find what it was his ghost wants us to find. But how can we do that? His brother was murdered, so I'm sure it's all closed off as a crime scene, Morgan said. Oh, don't worry about that. Jolene's eyes sparkled. I know just what we can do to get inside Skinner's house without the police ever knowing we were there. Cal glanced back up at the hospital as he walked across the parking lot. He'd had to come and see for himself that Celeste was okay. Folding himself into his car, he shoved the key in the ignition, cursing the heavy weight dragging down his heart. He wasn't used to feeling this way. He'd hated leaving without saying anything to Celeste the night before, but he'd been hurt when she pushed him away, which was strange, because plenty of girls had turned him down, and it never really bothered him before. Why had he even kissed her in the first place? Celeste was his oldest and best friend. He'd known the Blackmore sisters since they were kids. Even though they were all like sisters to him, he was closest to Celeste. Except lately, the way he felt about her had taken a whole different turn. Last night, kissing her had seemed natural. He'd wanted to badly, but apparently she didn't feel the same way. For some reason, that crushed him. And Cal wasn't used to it. Most women were very receptive to his kisses, but with the few that hadn't, he just shrugged and moved on. He couldn't do that with Celeste, though. She was more than just a casual fling. She was important. She mattered to him, probably more than any other person in his life.
Aww.
He drove out of the parking lot, pulling in a deep breath as he glanced back at the hospital in his rearview mirror. Celeste had been part of his life since he was a boy. Anytime he had anything serious to discuss, he called Celeste. They'd celebrated all their life's high points and commiserated the low points together. And they always had fun when they were together. Why hadn't he recognized his feelings for her sooner? Maybe he just hadn't been ready until now. But the worst part was, he didn't know if he could go back to just being friends with Celeste, now that he knew what his true feelings for her were.
Neither
He
can
pointed his
she.
car toward the Bull and Claw, where he was meeting Camilla. Not for a date, like Camilla was probably hoping. He was going to break it off with her. Gal could feel his carefree bachelor days coming to an end. Camilla was fun and all, but she wasn't anyone he'd want to spend the rest of his life with. Not like Celeste. Somehow, he didn't have the heart for playing the field anymore. Casual dating had lost its appeal. His gut was telling him he should just forget about Celeste. Steer clear of her, and his feelings would subside. Out of sight, out of mind. Except he couldn't just abandon the Blackmores. They needed him to help decipher the journal. He had to help them. Hopefully, he could do what needed to be done and keep his contact with Celeste to a minimum. He just hoped his heart would survive.
It won't. Well, it will.
Chapter 19. They waited 3 hours for the doctor to release Celeste, and it was dark by the time they left the hospital. Jolene said that was perfect for what she had in mind, which might have made Celeste worry more if she hadn't been liberal with the pain pills.
Wow.
The sisters tried to talk her into going straight home, but Celeste won the argument by telling them she was the only one that knew exactly where Skinner's ghost had been pointing. Now, standing in the dark outside Skinner's back door, while Jolene tried to pick the lock, Celeste questioned the wisdom of her ways. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Morgan whispered. "Shh." Jolene fanned her hand behind her. "I've almost got it." Celeste heard a click, and then her heart skipped a beat as Jolene pushed the door open and slipped inside. Morgan, Fiona, and Celeste followed. Inside the house was dark. Moonlight filtered in through the windows, causing eerie shadows. They stood in the kitchen for a few seconds, listening to the silence. No ghosts appeared, although Celeste felt like this would be the perfect time for one to pop out from a wall and scare the crap out of her. "The study's over here." Jolene took a small flashlight out of her jacket pocket, pointed the beam at the floor, and started walking. Celeste and her sisters followed. The floor creaked and groaned under their feet, each sound sending Celeste's stomach plummeting. They went through the dining room, stopping short at the study door, which was taped off with yellow crime scene tape. Jolene hesitated but a second, then ducked under the tape, lifting it for her sisters to follow. Celeste's stomach roiled as she remembered the fight they'd had with the bad guys, and how Skinner's brother's body had lain slumped on the desk the whole time. The blood stain was visible on the top of the desk, and the room was still littered with papers. The bronze bust that had cracked her head hadn't moved from where it had fallen on the floor. "Okay, so where should we look?" Fiona raised her brows at Celeste. "Over here." She crossed to the closet where she'd seen the ghost. The closet was empty, and the door was open just as it had been during the fight. She stood in the doorway and looked into the closet, but it was too dark to see anything. "Shine the light down there." She indicated the bottom corner of the closet, where Skinner's ghost had been pointing. The beam of Jolene's flashlight shone on an empty space. Celeste's heart skipped. There was nothing there except the wide pine flooring and an old wire coat hanger. "It's empty." Jolene looked up at Celeste. "Now what?" "I dunno. Do you think Overton took whatever was there?" Morgan shook her head. "I don't think they took anything. I was here most of the time the police were here. Overton only let Fiona go to the hospital with you. He made me and Jolene stay and give a statement." "A statement? I imagine you left out a few details about the fight," Celeste said. Morgan laughed. "Yeah, we only told them what they needed to know. They didn't take anything with them, other than the body. Celeste pressed her lips together. Her wrist was starting to throb, and she wondered if Skinner had sent her on a wild goose chase. Morgan came over to the closet door and squatted down, motioning for Jolene to hand over the flashlight. You know how I have a secret hiding place in my room at home? Morgan asked. The one you've had since you were a kid, that you refuse to tell us where it is? Yup. Morgan straightened the hook on the wire coat hanger and scraped at the floor. I bet Skinner had a similar hiding spot. Celeste held her breath, while Morgan wiggled the coat hanger around, then pushed it under the crack in one of the floorboards and pried part of the board up. See? She aimed the light of the flashlight inside the hole. Celeste felt deflated. It looks empty. Let me see. Morgan fished around in the hole with her hand. Are you looking for this? Celeste's heart jerked upon hearing the voice come from the other side of the room. They'd been so intent on watching Morgan, they hadn't noticed anyone approach. You. Jolene spun around, shining the light on the man. A man Celeste recognized from an earlier mysterious encounter. Mateo. He was holding up the poetry book, the key they needed to decipher the journal. Jolene crossed the room in 3 angry steps and grabbed the book out of his hand. Give me that. A startled look crossed his face. I brought it here to give to you. Yeah, sure. Jolene narrowed her eyes at him. Then why are you sneaking around here in the middle of the night? Why are you? Well, Jolene looked around at her sisters. None of your business, that's why. Mateo's laugh had a deep, pleasing timbre to it, and his smile seemed genuine. Celeste noticed he was handsome in a dark, exotic kind of way. She also noticed that he was looking at Jolene with quite a bit of interest. Jolene must have noticed, too, because she backed away from him, holding the book against her chest. What do you want? Morgan asked. Mateo shrugged, holding his hands out at his sides. Nothing. I am here to help you. Sort of. Help us how? I can't really say much more. But I took the book from the closet to keep it from your enemies, and now I must go. We shouldn't be seen together. He turned and slipped out of the room. Wait, you can't just run off. Jolene ran out of the room after him. Morgan replaced the floorboard and dusted off her hands. Well, looks like we got what we came for. Jolene returned into the room. He disappeared. Can you believe that guy? It does seem odd, but I'm not going to complain. The book is the final piece of the puzzle we need to figure out where the treasure is, Celeste said, cradling her bad arm against her chest. The pain was starting to escalate, and she was getting to the point where she cared more about taking a pain pill and going to bed than she did about fending off pirates or finding a treasure. Is your wrist starting to hurt? Fiona asked. When we get home, I'll find a carnelian that you can wrap up next to the cast. That should help it heal. Celeste remembered that carnelian was a healing stone. Fiona had given one to Jolene when she'd cut her arm, and it had healed it overnight. Celeste was skeptical about it healing her broken wrist, but she'd try just about anything right now. We should get you home now. Morgan started toward the door. But we don't know if the book is what Skinner's ghost wanted us to find. Jolene glanced over at the closet. The closet's empty, so even if it isn't what he wanted, there's no reason for us to stay. Plus, we need to get cracking on that journal, now that we have the cipher key, Fiona said. But we still don't even know if Mateo is a good guy or a bad guy. Jolene glanced.
I didn't think about that either.
Well, How could he possibly be a bad guy? He gave us the book, Morgan replied. Jolene looked suspiciously at the book. Maybe it's a fake to throw us off track, like we did to Overton. Morgan held her hand out, and Jolene put the book in it. Morgan thumbed the pages, holding them under the beam from the flashlight. It looks authentic to me. It would be hard to fake an old book like this. Besides, I'm getting good vibes from it. Mateo is on our side. Jolene sighed. But he's so mysterious, she sputtered. And cute, Morgan added, as she made her way toward the door.
Made for Jolene.
Jolene rolled her eyes.
I love Jolene.
And they all followed Morgan out. Celeste looked back into the room as she crossed the threshold and saw two swirls of mist over by the closet. Skinner and his brother? One of them gave her a thumbs up, and then they both disappeared, leaving her with a warm feeling around her heart, knowing the book was what Skinner wanted her to find, and that the two brothers were together, wherever they were. Chapter 20. Celeste rolled over in her bed, startling herself as the cast on her hand banged hollowly into the headboard. She'd forgotten about her wrist. She moved her arm tentatively, surprised to discover it didn't hurt at all. Pushing herself to a sitting position, she leaned back against the pillows she had piled at the head of the bed and peeked at the orange carnelian stone Fiona had slipped into the edge of the cast. Guess it must be doing the trick. Since there were no ghosts or cats to distract her, she got out of bed and slipped on a pair of sweatpants and a sweatshirt. The early fall Maine nights were growing chilly, which meant for chilly mornings. By noon, she'd be changing back into capris and a t-shirt. Her head still throbbed with a dull pain,
Yoga with a broken wrist.
but it was much milder than the day before. She did have a tender spot on the back, and brushing her hair didn't appeal to her, so she simply ruffled it with her fingers and headed downstairs. In the kitchen, Celeste found a note from Morgan under a packet of herbs. Her heart warmed, knowing her sister had made a special concoction of willow bark and chamomile for her to steep into a tea, which would help her headache. She heated some water, grabbed a mug, and dunked the tea bag, watching the steam waft up. Voices drifted out from the informal living room, so she headed in that direction. Standing in the doorway, she could see Jolene and Cal sitting next to each other on the sofa, their heads bent over the coffee table. Cal looked up, and her heart skipped when their eyes met.
Aww.
Morning, she cracked a smile, walking further into the room. Hey, sis, how are you feeling? Jolene asked. Pretty good. Celeste held up her bad arm. My wrist doesn't even hurt at all. I guess those gemstones really do work. Don't I know it? Jolene said, looking at the fading scar on her own arm. So, what are you guys doing? Celeste perched on the edge of one of the overstuffed chairs and leaned forward for a better look. The old journal and the poetry book both lay spread open on the table. Cal had a notebook in front of him, and it appeared they were attempting to decipher the book. Her heart tugged when she remembered her and Cal doing a similar exercise earlier in the summer.
Aww.
Their heads bent together over those very same books. But that was before she screwed things up. Jake brought the journal back, so we're trying to decipher this thing and figure out what Skinner found, Cal said, keeping his eyes glued firmly to the books. Any luck? Jolene puffed out her cheeks. Not really. The journal is pretty big, and we have no idea exactly where Skinner made his find. And we're running out of time, Cal added. The low tide is tomorrow night. which means we only have about 30 hours to figure out where this treasure is so we can take it away from the pirates. Yeah, and I keep looking over my shoulder, thinking they are going to come for us. Celeste rolled the mug in her palms. It was warm and soothing, but she still felt panic starting to claw at her gut. What if the pirates broke in like they did earlier in the summer? How would they manage to fight them off and figure out the clue in the journal? And what if one of them got kidnapped again? Where's Morgan and Fiona? They had some customer orders to tend to, so they went to Sticks and Stones. Luke sent Buzz with them, just in case. Okay, well, how can I help? Celeste put her mug down on a side table and slid down onto the floor next to the coffee table, ready to help with the journal. Jolene looked at her watch. Actually, I have to go meet Jake. You can take over scanning the journal for passages that might be of interest. I've been finding them, and Cal's been looking up the code in the poetry book. Jolene slid the journal around so that it was facing Celeste, then stood up and started toward the front hall. Cal looked up from the book. See you later. Jolene smiled in his direction. No problem. Good luck, you guys. Thanks.
Good luck
Celeste
rekindling
said,
a relationship.
and watched her disappear. A few seconds later, she heard the front door click open, then shut again, announcing Jolene's departure. She and Cal were alone in the house.
Again.
Like they had been many times before, except this time, it felt incredibly awkward. Celeste decided the best course was to focus on finding what they needed from the journal. She was looking back to front, Cal said, flipping a page of the journal and pointing. Here's where she stopped. Okay, thanks, Celeste murmured as she studied the page. The paper itself was yellowed and brittle. She was almost afraid to turn the pages, for fear of them disintegrating. The scrolly writing, done with some sort of quill or fountain pen, was faded and marred with dots of ink. The paragraphs were long and didn't make much sense as they were encoded. I feel like we should be looking for a poem or a riddle or something. Remember how the clues we found earlier were poems? She looked up at Cal. I think you're right. He looked up, and their eyes met, causing a riot of emotions to run through her. Glancing back down at his book just as quickly, he added, maybe we should focus on only the pages where the text is broken up into centered lines, like a poem would be. Good idea. Celeste flipped the pages carefully, while Cal worked on deciphering the last passage he and Jolene had thought worthwhile. He sighed, put the pen down, and rubbed his face with his hands. This one doesn't give us any clue. It talks about some silks and silver he brought back from the West Indies. It mentions his exotic bride. Was his wife from the West Indies? Celeste's forehead puckered. I have no idea. That's kind of interesting, actually. I'd like to dig into that some more. But right now, I have a passage here that might be what we are looking for. She turned the book to face him and pointed to a section of text that consisted of 2 uneven rows, situated in the center of the book. He copied each word down on a separate piece of paper, then started flipping the poetry book open to the various passages and scribbling down each word as he figured them out. Celeste took the journal back and continued looking in case the poem was a dead end. This is interesting. Cal tapped the end of the pen on the table as he studied the translated poem. What? Celeste cocked her head sideways,
This is a 9.
and Cal slid the paper in her direction so she could read it. A treacherous maze. 2 maps are better than 1. The hide marks marks the spot. What's that mean? She wrinkled her face at him. Cal pressed his lips together. Not sure. But I think that last line might refer to the map we found this summer. The one that was on leather, or hide. Celeste glanced over at the table. The ornate silver box was back in place. Jake must have brought it when he returned the journal. She got up from her seat and crossed to the box, then opened it. A leather treasure map was rolled up neatly inside, as was the maze map that Jolene had found in her pocket. She lifted out the leather map and brought it over to the coffee table, spreading it out awkwardly, the cast on her wrist interfering with her normal movement. Here, let me help. Cal pushed the journal aside to make room for the map, which he spread out facing him. Do you have that map of the maze handy? Yep, it was right in the box. She turned and grabbed it, handing it to Cal. He placed it on the table, just above the leather map. Resting his chin in his hand, he studied them. Celeste looked at them from a right angle. She didn't see anything that might be helpful. Look at this. Cal pointed to a spot on the map, and Celeste tilted her neck to see it from the same angle as him. I don't see anything. Come over here, and you'll get a better look. He motioned to the couch beside him, and Celeste's stomach did a little flip as she walked over and slid onto the sofa.
Oh!
She leaned forward, her eyes flicking between the two maps. The shape did look sort of similar, but she had no idea what it meant. See how the leather map has the same sort of boundary shapes as the middle of the maze map?
Oh!
Cal asked. Yes. Well, I wonder if the maze map shows you how to get to where the treasure is, and the leather map shows you the final step of how to dig it up or something. Celeste squinted at the maps. It could. But this whole time I thought the leather map was a map of the area of tunnels that blew up this summer. That's where all the clues led us.
Yeah?
Yeah, me too. But what if it wasn't? What if the tunnels were just a decoy, and this whole time the clues have been leading us to somewhere else, where the real treasure is? It could be.
Finishing up the chest.
But look at the leather map. It looks like the edges show the ocean outside where the treasure is. But everything else we found seems to indicate the treasure is in the ocean. She leaned forward to point at the crude waves drawn on the edge of the map, and her knee brushed against Cal's, sending sparks shooting through her. She glanced over, and he was looking at her the same way she was looking at him. He'd felt it too. Time slowed down. She was aware of the muted cry. That wasn't the only thing.
Hold up. Here we go, guys. Sorry, my bad.
Seagulls outside on the ocean.
My bad, guys.
The dust motes hanging in the slats of sun that filtered in the window, and Cal's sapphire eyes drilling into hers. A warm tingle of attraction clutched at her belly as Cal slowly leaned toward her. Would he kiss her again?
Please, please, please.
She certainly hoped so. And this time, she had no intention of pushing him away. And then his cell phone chirped.
Damn it.
Cal jerked back on the couch and dug in his pocket, pulling out the offending gadget and looking at the display. Oh, sorry, I have an appointment. I have to go. He stood up, backing away from the couch and her.
Oh.
If you can pick out any more passages which look promising, that would be great. I'll be back later tonight to help decipher them. Then he turned and practically ran out of the room before she could even say goodbye. Chapter 21.
Okay, guys, that was interesting. I'm gonna continue back at chapter 21 next time we're back. I have dinner to eat, so I gotta go. Bye, guys. Thank you for watching. Hope you guys like this. Go ahead and watch the first part if you haven't already, and you should have. Anyway, I gotta go. Peace out, y'all.